Exposing the deep state and government overreach. You're with Pelle Neroth Tayolr on today's News Talk, The Pulse.
Welcome to the Pelle Neroth Tayolr Show. Well, incredible things going on in geopolitics at the moment. We're actually going to turn onto a story that's all too quickly receding into the distance, which is the Corona COVID scandal, pandemic of a couple of years ago. But its reverberations continue with the sentencing of Reiner Fuellmich, who's a German activist, and was part of this Corona committee, which was broadcasting on YouTube for hours on end, a sort of latter-day, Watergate broadcasts. Hour after hour, people were seeing the truth for themselves with the testimonies from witnesses, doctors, experts, and all the rest of it, shredding the establishment view of what actually happened. Now, Reiner Fuellmich, who was a central figure in the German-speaking world in this scandal, has just been sentenced to a very long prison sentence, or a rather long prison sentence, and he's been suffering almost Julian Assange-like persecution. Now, the question is, was it justified? There are some people. I had Robert Sibison, who was Reiner Fuellmich's producer on that live stream, and got to know him rather well, and he's rather skeptical. He was saying, well, he's a bit of a shady character, or a hero with clay feet, or whatever you want to call it, a mixed character. But if you read Reiner Fuellmich's own Substack and his activist friends, it's very much more black and white story of a single man being persecuted for taking on the deep state in Europe, in particular Germany. Well, with us today to talk about attempts to get him free and to bring his case to attention and really give us the inside story of what really happened when in his persecution. We've got Meike Terhorst, who's an attorney searching for the truth and standing up for freedom, as her X profile says. And she has been following the case very closely, as has Jamila Lepere, who's a journalist, an independent journalist, who is investigating. She worked very heavily on the Assange case, and sort of the Fuellmich case is your big project at the moment. So you can tell us, I think you've been to a lot of the court case out there in Germany, and they're both hailing from the Netherlands, and very, very pleased to welcome them today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Yes. It says here that in October 2023, Reiner Fuellmich was unlawfully kidnapped in Mexico by German government operatives. Since then, he's been imprisoned without due process in the high-security prison in Göttingen-Rosdorf. He's been shackled, placed in solitary confinement, and even denied the dignity of visiting his elderly mother as she lay on his deathbed. She passed away without a chance to see her son, whom she no doubt loved and was proud of. And then it goes on with a sort of lots of series of indignities. Meike, could you perhaps pick up on how this story started and what the official story is of his incarceration, and start to develop this idea of why it was a judicial murder, if you like?
Yeah, well, I can maybe briefly go into how I know Reiner Fuellmich. I was together with Reiner in a group of Children's Health Defense. It's called the PCR group because we all thought that the PCR tests are the true key to unlocking all the secrets of the pandemic. And so every Thursday we would meet and we get guests on, experts, doctors, scientists, and so on, journalists, who would tell us their experience with all kinds of interesting subjects. And so as part of this bigger group, I got to know him, and he told us what he was doing and what he was investigating. And I thought he came across as a very honest lawyer and a fearless one as well. And so I have a lot of. I thought he was just a great person to also have on the group. And he told us, like in 23, that he could not stay in the US anymore because his bank accounts were frozen and he had to leave. And he was staying with friends with his wife in Mexico. And then later on, we were informed that he was kind of kidnapped and taken to Germany. So that was very strange. And at the time, I thought it was very, very awkward that anything like this could happen to a lawyer. Because as a lawyer, you're very protected by the law to do your job and he could, as a very famous one, he has done some really big court cases against Volkswagen and Deutsche Bank. So he's one of the most famous German lawyers. He could be kidnapped like this by the Dutch German secret police and taken to Germany and put into prison. It was very weird. And there was a lot of insecurity because there were some rumors that he had done all kinds of things wrong. So there, in the group, it was not very clear at the moment what had happened, whether he had done something wrong or not. But like with a few, we really thought like it sounds like we really sound like the rat smell. So we didn't trust it. And then we got some information about the German leaked file from the German Secret Service. Jamila can tell more about this. That he was kind of trapped. He had fallen in a trap of the German Secret Service. And I found it, I was reading Jamila's articles in our biggest alternative newspaper in the Netherlands called The Other Newspaper. And I was feeling kind of sick hearing all these dreadful stories about Reiner Fuellmich, like being treated awfully and also being put in solitary confinement and so on. And I thought it was just unacceptable, and I really wanted to do something. So together with Jamila, we set up a letter which was signed by many people, also Mark Trotzi and Shabnam Palezi Mohammed from World Council for Health and others, and Vera Sharaf. So to ask the Special Rapporteur on Torture of the UN to look into Reiner's case, because the UN can kind of overstep the German court system and ask for questions with the prison that he is in, but also with the court. And so it's a kind of brilliant legal way to kind of somehow get attention to this horrible situation. And we sent a letter already in December 16th to the Special Rapporteur, but we did not receive any reply. And only through some help from people, a kind woman in Geneva, we were able to kind of officially hand it in. So from last Monday, it's officially handed in, and now they are working on this request.
Right, Jamila, you said that you knew a little bit more about this dossier that the German intelligence or the German police had assembled.
Yes. Well, Reiner has several lawyers. There's Katja Wurmer, who's the main lawyer, and then there's Christophe Miseret. He is a lawyer. I forget where he's from, and then there's a third and fourth lawyer. And in the background, there's somebody advising, another lawyer. And Christophe Miseret, he at one point got information from a source who told him that in 2021 there had been a sort of an order given by the Verfassungsschutz, which is the internal intelligence agency in Germany, to find a way to be able to criminally prosecute Reiner Fuellmich, so that he would never be able to hold a political position ever. And this has to do, I think the context, Meike already touched on it. Reiner Fuellmich had done a lot of big cases. So he was already not, the government's most favorite lawyer in the world. And he already had problems with bank accounts. They would constantly use the excuse of suspicion of whitewashing to cancel or close a bank account, and he would start a new one, etc., etc. So he already was juggling, his financial, even though he had a proper office and he had lots of people working for him, he did size down a little bit over the years, but he had a running lawyer's practice. And so when Corona came, he was already very suspicious of the government because of all those big cases he'd done. He knew immediately that this didn't make sense. So then he met three other lawyers, one of them being Viviane Fischer, who came to him through Wolfgang Wodark, who is the ex-parliamentary member, but also a medical guy. And they suggested to start a platform to invite people, experts who had another story, who had other facts to tell people what was the alternative or other possibilities of seeing reality. So that's what they did. And they had planned to do it for 3 weeks. And for 3 weeks, about 8 sessions, and then they would stop because they thought then everybody's informed. And of course, the whole Corona affair will be done and dusted and will carry on. But there was such an interest in this platform, and people started donating money. Millions came in, 3 point something million they received. And there was such a need. I mean, for me personally as well, I was really hungry for the information that came from the Corona Investigative Committee. And it was done every week. They would interview people. They would invite a couple of people, one after the other, and they would talk maybe for 2-3 hours, or sometimes longer. So that was hugely successful. And then 2 other lawyers joined. So 4 lawyers were running this platform. And at the same time, Reiner Fuellmich decided to do a class action suit to see if he could somewhere in the world start this to fight the PCR test, because that's what Meike said, that was the key. If you could prove that the PCR test was faulty, which it is, and then the whole Corona story was gone. We wouldn't be talking about false positives and asymptomatic infections, blah, blah, blah. So he did that with yet another lawyer called Marcel Templin, who will be important later on. They sort of fell out because Marcel Templin made a mistake. So that all collapsed. And he just did the class action suit on his own, trying to get groups in other countries or groups that already were doing the same to join them. But his main work in the meantime was this platform together with Viviane Fischer and Justus Hofmann and Antonia Fischer. And so the last 2, they fell out quite soon. They didn't do any organizational work. They showed up for half the sessions. They never asked many questions, or not at all. And so soon, Viviane Fischer and Reiner Fuellmich decided those 2, it doesn't work. Let's split. So at first, there was an agreement that they would step out, but all of a sudden in December 2021, I think, Antonia Fischer and Justus Hofmann came back, and they said actually they wanted part of the donations. In the statute of the platform, it was written that the money was only to go to the broadcasting or to the podcasts, not to the people. So Reiner didn't want to have any of it, and the atmosphere was already not superb. So that sort of escalated, and in the end they pulled away, and that was that. Then Reiner Fuellmich joined a new party, the political party Die Basis. That's where the Verfassungsschutz document relates to. And he became the front runner together with Viviane Fischer. And within weeks, they gathered 30,000 members. And it looked like he was going to make a really good chance to get into the Bundes parliament. And so in the summer of 2022, both the Basis sort of collapsed, mainly also to do with the collapse of the platform, because Viviane Fischer at one point closed his access to the platform, told the hundreds of thousands of people viewing that he had something to justify or to make right. And everybody was shocked and in bewilderment and believed her because, she seemed trustworthy, and he didn't have a platform anymore. Of course, he couldn't bring his side of the story, which we know from lectures at Chatham House. I think Meike knows who I'm referring to, but we know that this is a practice they do. You take the microphone first, and then the audience is sort of on your side immediately because you're like little ducklings, following their mother. So in the end, Reiner did get a platform with Bittel TV to say his side of the story. So, but by that time he was quite angry. So not all of those explanations came out very well because he was just too angry by the betrayal. Viviane Fischer and he, together with the Basis, had agreed to that they wouldn't throw out the dirty laundry. They would cover it up. They would solve things inside and not go outside. And yet she twice went outside with it, and once very close to the elections. And that sort of made everything collapse. So knowing this document from the Verfassungsschutz, then of course there are questions raised, like what was everybody's role in this? Was he meant to be destroyed just before the elections and whatever? So that's basically the framework.
Yeah, I mean, begs the question then, if some of these people, I don't know if it's liable to mention their names, but these people who seem to be on his side and part of his Corona committee were inserted by the intelligence agencies to blow the whole thing up and destroy Fuellmich. We'll talk about that after the break.
Get your favorite merchandise from our official The Pulse shop. You'll find exclusive online t-shirts, mugs, hats, hoodies, and more at thepulse.today.
Put the keys down, Kevin.
But I'm gonna drive home.
There are several warning signs present that you shouldn't be driving.
My text to emoji ratio has gotten a little out of hand.
A little?
Yep, I'm definitely gonna call a ride home.
Sometimes life can be overwhelming, and suicide may seem like the only way to relieve the pain. Beyond Now is an evidence-based app created by Beyond Blue to help you cope when suicidal thoughts start to appear. You can use it to create an easy-to-follow plan that is personal to you and includes steps like know your warning signs so you can act early, make your environment safe by removing harmful items, activities you can do or people you can be with to distract yourself from suicidal thoughts, reminders of things that make you feel strong. Some of these steps might be tough to fill out, and that's okay. It can be helpful to make or share your safety plan with a trusted friend, family member, or mental health professional. You might feel like you're alone, but help is available. If you're worried you can't stay safe, use the red telephone icon to call your emergency contacts. Download the free Beyond Now app today to create your personal safety plan.
Free speech is alive and well on today's News Talk, The Pulse.
Welcome back to the Pelle Neroth Tayolr Show. We've got Meike Terhorst and Jamila Lepere, who are friends or activists on behalf of Reiner Fuellmich, who's a sort of a extremely well-known lawyer and Corona activist in Germany who's been jailed for a couple of years now. And we just been talking before the break about whether the German intelligence service, domestic intelligence service, had inserted a kind of saboteur inside the system there to take him down because he was a kind of threat to the German intellectual and intelligence and NATO establishment. We'll make it. I mean, do you think you followed this story now that there might have been a saboteur? Was it Viviane Fischer or someone else? What evidence is there for that, or is it just speculation?
There's no evidence, that you can say, okay, here's a document saying that Marcel Templin was instructed or so. But Marcel Templin is very important because he and Justus Hofmann, who was connected to the Corona Committee, but Marcel Templin wasn't. He only had to do with the class action suit. Yet Marcel Templin is also one of the three that handed in the charges. And he has no right to the money because he was never part of Corona Investigative. So that's already very strange why he is a party in this, or not officially, because it's a public prosecutor who's actually prosecuting, not them. But he's also the one, because at a certain point, because of the money being in a bank account, they were warned to not leave it there, but to put it away. So if the government confiscated the money, then not everything would be gone, So what they did is they invested $1 million in gold and they took loans out. So Reiner Fuellmich took out 200,000 and 500,000 in a loan, and Viviane Fischer took out 100,000. And they could do whatever they wanted. But of course, the idea was that it shouldn't be in a bank account, which is exactly what is claimed in court, that he should have kept it in a bank account. But Reiner Fuellmich keeps arguing, but that was the whole point. We had to take it out to keep it safe. So he invested it in his money. He got a lot of blame for that he built a pool and a hot tub and everything. And everybody said, he just lived a happy life with the money. But it wasn't that way. He had this pool and everything built. He was in the rubbish. And just 1 or 2 months before the sale of the house, it was all finished, and then it was sold as this luxurious property. But he never had the pleasure of it, or 2 months of it. But when the transaction came through of the house, then he was going to pay back the loan. That was the deal. They would have to pay back within a year. It took a little bit longer, but both of them had to pay it back. But Marcel Templin then, with Justus Hofmann, somehow, we don't know really how, pressured the solicitor and the buyer of the house to transfer 1.158 million of the 1.3 million to an account of Marcel Templin, who had nothing to do with the whole thing. And that was the reason that Reiner couldn't pay back the loan, because he only got I don't know, whatever left of that amount, 400,000 or 140,000 back. So he couldn't pay it.
Wow.
And the judges never said anything. They did say, yeah, that seems to have been an illegal transaction, a legal deed by Marcel Templin, but that's your problem. You should have paid back the money. It's like a crazy rationale.
Right. So he was going to pay back the money from the committee that he'd borrowed from the sale of a house, and then his lawyer finagled this and fixed it so that he got the money instead. I mean, How can I don't know. I mean, couldn't Fuellmich sue or something? And who is this?
But they're not doing anything. They're not doing anything with it.
Wow.
It's
So
it sounds like a complete setup, and so obvious one as well. And it's just annoying to see that still on Twitter there are messages saying that he's not honest and so on. Well, this has been clear from a very long time now that Marcel Templin is holding this huge amount of money without any entitlement. And so there is, in my mind, there cannot be a legal reason to blame Reiner Fuellmich for not paying back the money, because he was kind of scammed, you could say, by his own notary, we call it in the Netherlands.
And then, just sorry, we've got 3 minutes left. So, and then there was a senior prosecutor who was going to take on the case, and he thought this smells bad, and so someone got an inexperienced prosecutor from another town, and that he prosecuted. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that sounds like another infraction on his right.
That has to do with something else. There were payments made to his lawyer's office for work that the lawyers did for the Corona Ausschuss, because there was so much mail, so much telephone and organizational work. So they did some work. He paid them for it, and that was paid by monthly payments. Not every month the same, but it was paid. So that was the first attempt to get him to prosecute him. So it was put before the chief public prosecutor. It was a she, and she looked at the things and she said, but this was all used for Corona Ausschuss. You can discuss, maybe could it have been 5 cents more or less, but it was all used for what they said in their statutes that it was going to be used for. So I see no reason to prosecute. So she put it away, and then they went to Berlin to say, we'll try it there. But in Berlin, they said, well, the company you're talking about is never officially registered. They never finished the registration. So these are just a bunch of people, a bunch of private people doing this. So I have no reason to do anything with this company frame. So it went back to Göttingen. Then it was put to the chief public prosecutor again. And she then asked a question like, well, is there then new evidence or new proof? And then it was quiet, and a new junior public prosecutor came, transferred from Hanover. And we don't know where this chief prosecutor has gone to. She just went.
Wow.
So there is no direct proof, but there are all these very strange happenings.
Very strange. Well, Meike, I mean, how would you conclude? What are the next steps? I mean, you're assembling a case here that, on the surface of it, I'm not a lawyer, seems very suspect. How can we the truth seekers construct a case against the German state? And where are you going next?
Well, I'm not an expert at German law, so I cannot say like how they should do it. But I would suspect like he would appeal from this conviction, and expect something to be done against Marshall Templin, because it's, and also like this leaked file from the Secret Service, perhaps that could be done, something could be done against this to maybe write to the German Bundestag, the parliament, to ask their help, because it's illegal to kind of prosecute a lawyer. A lawyer is a protected kind of job, so yeah, it sounds very much like he's kind of blocked in doing his work as a lawyer or politician.
Yeah. Well, the legal procedure for the appeal is that the court now has about 17 weeks to formulate their written statement. So that will be August at the latest. And then the defense has a month to react, and it's only a written reaction. There's no hearing in the appeal. It's only a written exercise. And then there's some time afterwards, then there's the verdict. And then there's a second case, of course, but we can talk about that another time, because there's no time left.
Well, I mean, an incredibly interesting story, and you told it in very great detail and in a very persuasive and interesting way. And I hope everyone checks this out, and we'll follow any updates on it with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Meike Terhorst and Jamila Lepere. This is the Pelle Neroth Tayolr Show. We'll be back after the break.
Get your favorite merchandise from our official The Pulse shop. You'll find exclusive online t-shirts, mugs, hats, hoodies, and more at thepulse.today.
Childhood should be the happiest time of life, but for many, it's riddled with pain, rejection, shame, and isolation. At Mercy Ships, we're answering the cries of some of the world's most forgotten children and adults through free, life-changing surgeries. These once heartbroken boys and girls, and many men and women too, are now restored, accepted, and on their way to a life of opportunity and joy.
Quand on a enlevé la bande, premier pensionnat, j'ai dit que oui, me voici, est-ce que c'est vraiment réel?
No one can change the world on their own, but together, we can transform it by restoring hope to one person, one child at a time. Volunteers from your community and around the globe are bringing life-changing healing and hope to the forgotten poor. To learn how you too can help change the world one person at a time, go to mercyships.org.
Hey there, I'm Lance Bass, and this is Chip. For more than 100 years, American Humane has been on the front lines protecting animals in times of crisis. From Pearl Harbor to 9/11, the California wildfires, American Humane Rescue has provided life-saving assistance for animals in virtually every major national disaster. If you're anything like me, your pets mean the world to you. And if disaster strikes, you want to keep them safe. To prepare for an oncoming disaster, ensure your pet has secure and up-to-date identification. And if you must evacuate, remember to take your disaster preparedness kit with you. To learn more about disaster planning and how to keep your best friends safe, please visit AmericanHumane.org.
Geopolitical commentator and investigative journalist Pelle Neroth Tayolr on today's News Talk, The Pulse.
Welcome to the Pelle Neroth Tayolr Show. Well, we've got a good friend and returning guest, Greg Simons, with us, who's just jetted in from the university, from Dhaka, I should say, where he's a professor of journalism at the Daffodil University in that country. And of course, he's an expert on the subcontinent. So he's going to tell us a little bit for the next couple of minutes what really happened in that conflict between Pakistan and India. There's a strong sense that we didn't get the whole story in the West. So in fact, I didn't bother reading it. But of course, there's a lot of disinformation coming in from the both actors. But I'm sure that Greg, who's well-versed in things like propaganda and versus mainstream, is going to sort of work it out for us or help us understand what really went on. But before we go into that, Greg, and then the second half of our interview, we're going to talk a little bit about the sensational thing Trump's been saying about ending wars in the Middle East and the world. It places him far to the left of the neocons. And he's also been called in the Daily Telegraph, I think, this week, the most left-wing president America ever had. So I'll ask for Greg's reaction on that. That totally surprises people who think he's the next incarnation of Hitler. or was it Mussolini, or was it Stalin, or something like that? Anyway, Greg, you're back in Scandinavia now. What's it like after being in Dhaka?
Feels a little bit cooler, and the food tastes not quite so vivid, to say the least.
Yeah.
And it's very, very quiet.
Right. Well, I mean, it's the best time to be here, I think, May, isn't it? I mean, I'm sitting out on the terrace in the mornings of my studio, and it's fronting a large garden, and I sit there sipping my coffee and feel that all is well with the world. It almost makes up for the 4 months of darkness, you know, and the cold winters and all the other things about Sweden. But now it's perfect paradise, which, of course, is why you're here. You timed it so that you come at the best time. Greg, you are an avid and very close observer of what's going on in India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. What really happened in this conflict between India and Pakistan that we thought might escalate to nuclear for a while?
Well, when I watched it, it didn't quite match what was being put in the headlines. There were some things wrong with it, but yet one could say that it was plausible enough for non-critical thinkers to go along with the flow. So one needs to understand, I mean, was there a coincidence in the nature and the timing of the event? And if you start digging into that, then you start to get some problems. So, I mean, if we go with the mainstream kind of narrative that Pakistan sponsored a terrorist attack in a very remote and yet picturesque part of India, which was renowned for being a beautiful destination, quiet, safe, peaceful. And one has to ask, why? Why there? Why then? Why now? And it doesn't make a load of sense theoretically. And it's very interesting, of course, if you hear what the Pakistani defense minister said when speaking on the issue, and the Western journalist just about swallowed the mic, because he said, well, Pakistan has been doing the dirty work geopolitically for the West for decades now. We have been carrying out a lot of these different attacks for the benefit of the West. So you have that little one. And of course, one needs to just look at the history of Afghanistan during the Soviet period, 1979 to 89, as being a part of that, but also other incidents too. And India, of course, remembers the attack on Mumbai, which was a horrendous attack, but it was on a major city, on major hotels, not in the middle of the countryside. I mean, this was a blatant attack, and on one of these financial centers of India. So, okay, from a point of view of propaganda and politics, one can understand. It makes sense. But why this particular one? And I think one of the problems for the US and the West is that things have been spiraling out of their control in South Asia. And in particular, you have a tense but relatively stable relationship between India and Pakistan. But China was, well, they've had a good relationship with Pakistan for a long time, but India and China were making up and making progress. And the West relies on this organized chaos to keep their relative hegemony. If we look at the timing of this, you can see in the background these diplomatic moves in South Asia. And it seems to have been aimed at disrupting those. And of course, creating frictions, not only between India and Pakistan, but also making life difficult for China, who wants a stable, peaceful environment in order to maximize their self-interest and pursuit of policy. The thing which made me very suspicious to begin with was you had all of these ones that the finger pointed straight at Pakistan, and one has to ask, okay, what does Pakistan have to gain from this? I mean, it's not to say that maybe they have not done this, but how would they benefit? And it's difficult to say how they'll benefit. There are a lot of potential costs, including a nuclear exchange between the two of them. And this, of course, has been bandied about rather openly. But if we go back to those proof of the alleged terrorist group who are posing on social media platforms, and they, these are the jihadists who, if we go by the story, were supported by Pakistan to go and kill Indians and make life difficult. But when you look at them, they're clean shaven. If you're a jihadist, I mean, you're not clean shaven, because having a beard is an expression of faith. It's virtue signaling for Islamic-based terrorism. And I mean, you just look at the weapons they were using. Late model, US-made infantry weapons. I mean, it reminds me a lot of these so-called democratic jihadists the Americans in the West sent into Syria and into Libya and so forth. So, I mean, there are a whole lot of things which no one is talking about openly, because you have these raw emotions. First of all, the allegation that Pakistan did this because in the past they have been doing this, so therefore they're guilty, and the assumption of guilt without necessarily burden of proof being fully there. And you have this focus on the conflict, which was more at, well, this could happen, that could happen, this can be an escalation. So then it moved quickly off the realm of common sense to emotions, especially emotions of, if we loosely say, honour. First of all, India's honour and dignity being offended by the attack, and then Pakistan's honour and dignity to defend itself and its honour and reputation on the international stage. So this is the problem of when you get emotions into international relations, especially when you get these things between two nuclear-armed powers. And I mean, it could send the whole South Asian subcontinent into a rather rapid downward spiral. And of course, in the middle of this, for example, Bangladesh, I mean, has increased tense relations between Bangladesh and India, especially after the regime change of Sheikh Hasina last year by the US support. And I mean, there's also this historical legacy which complicates things more. For example, Bangladesh was helped in 1971 by India to gain its independence from Pakistan. And recently you had Pakistan apologize for what it did in Bangladesh with the ethnic cleansing and so forth. And then you had the Bangladesh, which was demanding compensation, financial compensation for that. And we can have a look in a country like Bangladesh, which has, a hedging and a strategic ambiguity in its relation. So, as a general rule, a friend of everyone and an enemy of none. So this brings in the additional complication, especially with China, where Bangladesh is moving closer to China once more, as it had been under the former Prime Minister. But they realize now that they have been abandoned by the Americans because it was the Democrats who brought the interim government to power, not the Republicans, and definitely not Trump. And Trump said, Bangladesh is your problem to Modi. So you can see this cluster of very problematic geopolitics.
We're just going to interrupt there for a second and go into our break. This is the Pelle Neroth Tayolr Show with Greg Simons, back after the break.
Get your favorite merchandise from our official The Pulse shop. You'll find exclusive online t-shirts, mugs, hats, hoodies, and more at thepulse.today.
People might tell you that Lyme doesn't kill people, but we are losing people. People disappear from their lives.
One of the scariest things that I had to deal with was memory loss. Not just like I don't remember what I did last week, but like I forgot all the words to my own songs. I remember going to my primary care physician and he was like, you are 100% healthy, there's nothing wrong with you. And my response was, that's impossible, I'm dying.
I wasn't working, so I had all of these hospital bills. We had to move out of our home and move into my parents' basement.
I just wish I could have truly been present in those big moments, you know, when she took her first steps or, you know, her first day of preschool. Lyme is such a thief and it goes undetected because no one is looking for it.
For more information and prevention tips, go to projectlyme.org.
On a virtual road, you can test the limits of your driving ability to see how fast you can go under the most extreme conditions, like when it's dark, when the weather's bad, or when the unexpected happens. The higher the speed, the harder the impact. But driving isn't a game or a race. When you're on the road, just 10 miles per hour over the limit can mean the difference between life and death. You're responsible for people's lives and your own. Slow down and save lives.
Today's news. The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. Without checking facts first. Unfortunately, this is a legal thing, and this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Free speech has a home. Today's News Talk, The Pulse.
Welcome back to the Pelle Neroth Tayolr Show. Well, we just had an excellent conversation with Greg Simons, who's an academic originally from New Zealand, now based at the Daffodil International University in Dhaka in Bangladesh. And he's really given us an insight in the first half of this interview on what's really going on behind the scenes. Just to summarize, it seems very unlikely it was a straightforward Pakistan terrorist attack on India, because these guys why would Pakistan do it? And so obviously from Pakistan, these guys didn't look like jihadists because they didn't have beards and they had the very latest American rifles. And we know, those of us who know our geopolitics, know that the Americans and the West sponsor these fake Islamist or sometimes genuine Islamist movements all over West Asia to just create trouble for their great power rivals. And I think they did the same in Chechnya back in the early 2000s. The MI6 was sponsoring the Chechens, and Putin took a long time to forgive them for that. Some of those Tajik attacks on in Moscow, I think that might have MI6 fingerprints all over it. Syria is the most famous recent example. And now maybe this. So it's kind of entirely logical. But before we carry on, before we carry on to the escalation, perhaps, I thought America's kind of friends now with India. They want to make good impressions on India. Pakistan and China are friends. Russia's incidentally friends with India. So, why would the Americans sponsor a movement that did a terrorist attack on their friends in India? If you can work it out, if I can work it out, wouldn't India's most intelligent military analyst work out that this might have American fingerprints on it? Is it worth it for the Americans to alienate a country of 1.6 billion people?
Well, you need to understand how the US do their geopolitics. And this is according to the geostrategic imperatives. Kissinger, when he was famous for his different, very blunt depictions of geopolitical reality in a realism that is on steroids. And what he said, the United States has no permanent enemies and has no permanent allies, only permanent interests. And okay, so if we look at it from there, what is, India or China or Pakistan, completely irrelevant. What their permanent interest is to regain their hegemonic status. That is to contest their relative decline as a global hegemon. And to do that, they're prepared to throw anyone under the bus. So, they threw the EU under the bus with the Ukraine war because the EU was getting too close in terms of its economic growth and potential. And so they will do it to anyone because the three geostrategic imperatives to maintain their hegemony are based on keeping client states protected and obedient, keeping vassal states dependent and obedient, and to prevent the rise of blocks of powers or individual powers from rising and challenging. So what is India and what are India and China? They're a couple of the main pillars of this global south with the BRICS.
Greg, just to because I just wanted to talk about the Trump topic as well. So it escalated. No one wanted to back down. An enormous amount of prestige and pride and emotion, as you said. And then Americans apparently intervened, or maybe they didn't. Maybe Trump was taking credit for something he didn't do. Was it any ever risk of a nuclear war in your reckoning, or is it all totally overblown? Did the Pakistanis and the Indians work it out among themselves that they wouldn't take this extra step?
I think there was always a potential, especially when you get emotions overriding reason. This is the problem. But it wasn't the United States that solved this. This was the intervention, China with Pakistan and Russia with India as mediators behind the scenes. So, this happened in spite of the US, that you had this eventual back down for now.
Right. Okay. Well, it's interesting that it could well be true. But I'm just going to read a quote here from Trump. This great transformation has not come from Western interventionists giving you lectures on how to live or how to govern your own affairs. No, the gleaming marvels of Riyadh and Abu Dhabi were not created by so-called nation builders, neocons, or liberal non-profits like those who spent trillions failing to develop Kabul and Baghdad, so many other cities. Instead, the birth of the modern Middle East has been brought about by people of the region themselves, developing your own sovereign countries, pursuing your own unique visions, and charting your own destinies. In the end, the so-called nation builders wrecked far more nations than they built, and the interventionists were intervening in complex societies that they did not even understand themselves. My preference will always be for peace and partnership whenever those outcomes can be achieved, always. In recent years, far too many American presidents have been afflicted by the notion that it's our job to look into the souls of foreign leaders and use US policies to dispense justice. Your thoughts on that? That's pretty left-wing stuff, isn't it?
Well, what it is, I see it slightly differently. I see this as the art of flattery in international relations. Because you got the Gulf states, a very honor-bound state. So this is stroking the ego and moving closer this way rather than the usual, should we say, method of approaching these things from Burrell's we are the garden and you are the jungle, do as we tell you. So, he obviously understands this. His time on reality TV, his time in business, you can see how he interacts when he wants something. Then he can be quite gracious, quite flattering. And so this seems to be the case. Flatter the target, and then eventually the big ask will come later down the track. Because I see Trump differently than many see him. He is often projected as being this outsider. Of course, this particular game was not always played because, I mean, he was in thick with the Clintons and the Democrats for a long time. So rather than being an outsider of the system, I see him as being a part of the system, but operating differently. So in this respect, that Trump is not a reaction against the system, but he is a symptom of this system because it's in terminal decline. The empire is collapsing. And you have this moment. I mean, Gorbachev, of course, faced this exact moment and dilemma because he knew the Soviet Union was collapsing in the mid-'80s. So something radical needed to be done to save, not to kill the Soviet Union. And I see Trump very much along these lines. He is trying to save the US empire, and you can see this in a number of different speeches. It's not about putting down the US empire, but it's basically, I mean, the tariff war can be seen as an issue where everyone should pay for the privilege of resurrecting the US empire financially at their expense and against their interests, which is why you had a big backlash against it. So, I mean, this is how
do you think he's trying to keep the US empire, or is he trying to retrench it a little bit to save it, reform it, save it? Because, I mean, isn't that what all this Greenland and Canada and Panama Canal stuff was all about? So that we secure the Western Hemisphere, but perhaps retreat a little bit from the Middle East and from Europe.
I think he has changed the priorities of the empire. And that is necessary because when you have an empire in decline, its capability and capacity declines with it. So, I mean, traditionally, they've been taking on the three main geopolitical competitors or enemies, however you want to call it, Russia in Europe, Iran in West Asia, and China in the Indo-Pacific. And what the Ukraine war has shown, they're absolutely incapable of doing this now. Maybe in 1991 they may have been somewhat better, but this isn't 1991 anymore. So they need to rethink their strategy. And it seems rather than taking on all three at once, there is a much greater concentration how to weaken and contain China. And that's why I would see what happened between India and Pakistan as being potentially related to that, because, I mean, that would destabilize China's south and especially some important Belt Road initiatives, infrastructure initiatives taking place there.
So this terror attack was aimed at both China. As you said, it might create a terrorism situation in areas of its Belt and Road Initiative, and put India in its place. Right. Yeah. A final sort of question, which veering off in a direction I hadn't expected. I mean, you said I've heard Gorbachev comparison to Trump. Well, Gorbachev, of course, failed. The situation ran away from him. And then you had Yeltsin, who was the West loved him because he was a drunken, he could be controlled. And then you have Putin, who kind of a disciplinarian who's restored Russia to its greatness, according to his supporters. Is America going to have a Yeltsin? Is America going to have a Putin?
I don't think the US is going to have a Putin. I mean, when empires decline, I think the first obvious symptom of their decline before the physical collapse of the empire is that the leadership is weak and inadequate. So you get a it rots from the head down. And I mean, you could see that, for example, the Roman Empire. I mean, they had, when they collapsed, they had a massive army. They had well, in terms of hard power, a lot of strength. The US has a lot of strength, but is it capable of wielding it? And that depends on how the people trust or do not trust the political and military leadership of their country. And you can see increasingly people do not. I mean, you got those funny stories of US losing mysteriously F-18s in the Red Sea. And I mean, the reasons given are quite interesting, not for what they contain, but probably what they have omitted from the story.
Very, very interesting, Greg. I'm afraid we've got to wind up there, but a very interesting perspective on the subcontinental's affairs and an assessment of you or whether Trump is part of the empire or whether he's trying to break it up, and you go with the first option. Incredibly interesting, sir. Thank you so much. This is the Pelle Neroth Tayolr Show, and we'll be back after the break.